Okay, I have started the recording. I'll say welcome. My name is Marshall Foster. I am one of the 4 ESL Title III consultants, and I'm here as your host today for navigating the shifts through the ELD Standards Crosswalk. Today, as a participant, you'll receive an overview of the major revisions to the ELD Standards using the new Crosswalk document. Today, you will be able to better prepare for implementation of the updated standards for the 22-23 school year through hands-on activities that will allow you to think through potential shifts to key aspects of the North Carolina EL programs, such as lesson planning, curriculum pacing, classroom observations, and program design. All right. We will be using the chat feature. So I have disabled the Q&A, and then if you also want to talk or ask to discuss, you can obviously unmute to do that. Now I'd like to introduce our two fine presenters. We have Kristen Mills and Lisa Sivaja.
Good morning. It's great to see you all here with us today. Welcome. What we're going to talk about primarily is 4 major changes that have happened within the Crosswalk document. And we note the changes from the 2012 North Carolina DPI ELD standards for the standard course of study. And we're also focusing on that shift to our new 2020 ELD standards. We would ask that you look at the chat and find some different links that you can open up. Just to begin, there's a link to the Crosswalk slide deck, along with the bit.ly, as you see on the first slide. We also have a link to the conference notebook and the Crosswalk document itself. So if you can take a minute just to open those tabs, we think those will be very helpful as we move throughout the presentation today. And we also would encourage you to remember to utilize the same conference notebook that you have used if you've attended previous sessions. So you can click on the multifaceted roles link if you have not already opened this document, and you can type notes here. You can add special annotation, post-its, and stickers from the final pages of the conference notebook. And you can also link this to Go Open so that you can, share with people throughout the state over this year, your notes and ideas, and we can have an ongoing collaboration, which is really exciting. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to introduce ourselves. I'm Lisa Sivaja. I am an ESL teacher in Ashe County, North Carolina, and I work with students in grades kindergarten through 6th. And I'm also a member of the NC support team for multilingual learners.
Hey everyone, I am Kristen Mills. I am a STEM teacher at Harnett Central Middle School. I teach grades 6-8. I started my life in ESL, and I have kind of navigated from going from being a Title III program specialist in Johnston County, ESL teacher, back to the actual content classroom as an ELA teacher, because I really wanted to see what the aspects of actually being with the students and using all those great resources and just being able to immerse myself in that would be. And now I am taking the opportunity to teach STEM to them as well. So I've kind of been an array of everywhere. We are super excited to be here with you today. To get started, we want to go over a few logistical things. And first off, make sure your microphone is muted. If not, you will have the option to unmute during discussion activities. We will give you multiple times to do that, but we want to make sure while we're trying to give you all the great information that no one is actually unmuted just because of background sounds. We have gotten a few comments that in the past that it has echoed and that sort of thing. So if we stay muted, then that won't happen. Cameras off. You do not have to keep your camera off unless you notice a lag. Chances are you will see me cut my camera off because we have found that the presentation starts to kind of lag with the bandwidth. So it just kind of helps to conserve the bandwidth, but do not feel like you have to have your camera off. We love seeing your faces. Actively participate. Just like we tell everyone whenever we are like our students, we want you to gain all the knowledge possible. That means that you're engaged and you're really participating and getting everything you can get out of it. All right, and then just for fun, we have a Mentimeter poll. If you've already typed in the bit.ly and are following along that way, then you see the link there. If you are not and you're just following along with our WebEx and you have your phone, you can use your camera feature on your phone and scan the QR code, and it will take you to the Mentimeter poll. And I'm going to go ahead and navigate that way myself. Lisa, I just saw a message pop up. Can you put the links in the chat again for them?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, so our first question for you is, where are you joining us from? And what we're asking you to do is just take the pen and put the district that you are joining us from. All right, I'm going to give it about 30 seconds. Oh, we have 2 people from Duplin County. All right, so we have a good bit of our district spread out in throughout the state. That's awesome. So we're really hoping that you're able to take what we give you and provide you today and be able to really take it back to your district and school, depending on what level you're at, district or school level, and really provide the teachers with the knowledge that you gained today. All right, our next question is, how comfortable are you with the newly released ELD Crosswalk and other ELD Standards documents? Oh, I have to open the voting. I thought when you did it once it worked, but apparently not today. Okay, go for it now. Sorry, y'all. All right, about 30 seconds. All right, so we kind of have an array here, which is really awesome. If this is kind of your first time working with the Crosswalk documents, or if you've even just only reviewed them, we really want to encourage you to ask as many questions as possible. I will say, if we're not able to answer your questions during today's session, we will make note of those questions and we can discuss those during the Q&A today from 3:30 to 4:30 in the office hour time. We just want to make sure that we really do get all the information to you during our 2 hours right now and respect your time. For those of you that have had some training on the new documents or you're already using the documents for planning and instruction, you are our experts. We're really going to look at you that when there's ideas to talk about and how they're being used or what you've seen, for you to really let us know what you've seen and what successes you've seen with them and all the great things there. So we've got kind of two aspects here where we're asking all the questions we can because questions help everybody learn more. And then really giving the bright ideas, the successes that we've had already with these. All right, so on that note, we are going to get back to our presentation. All right, and one more question for you, and we encourage you to either type your answer in the chat box or unmute if you would like, but we want to know, what is your why? Why did you decide that you wanted to take our session today? We're hoping that we're able to meet everybody's needs, hoping to get everybody's goals accomplished, but we really just want to know what your why is, whether it's just networking, seeing if what you're thinking of the crosswalk is affirmed here today, to get new ideas, whatever that may be. So feel free, put it in the chat box or unmute. I like that. Layer my knowledge as well as learn from others. I like that a lot. I just was finishing up some stuff with my actual district, my school, where I had to do the yearbook, and all I've done is layer in the yearbook. So I'm like, yes, layer. I can totally do that all day long. There's some really great reasons here. Would anybody like to unmute and share?
Morning. This is Robin Cooper, principal at Rosehill Magnolia in Duplin County Schools. I am attending so I can better understand the standards and how they connect, so I can support my teachers as they implement their teaching strategies to improve student learning for our ML students.
That is wonderful. Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today. Lisa, are you seeing anything that pops out to you?
I see a lot of people have typed wanting to be able to support the teachers and the multilingual learners in their districts. And I think that's great. That's why we're all here. So that's a good focus for us.
Yes, I agree. All right. Well, Lisa, I'm going to mute and I'm going to let you take it over.
Okay. So next, we're going to talk about our objectives for today. We're going to provide an overview of the activities and the focus during this 2-hour presentation. So you'll see those pop up on the next slide in just a second. And I've had a little bit of difficulty with my technology, so I'm going to keep my camera off for most of the session. But I do want to point out, as you can see here on the slide, that our primary focus is to compare and contrast the 2012 and 2020 adopted standards. We're also going to take a look at the 4 major revisions, analyzing what they are and why these revisions impact instruction and how we can implement them. And then finally, we want to utilize the crosswalk to allow educators to adapt pacing guides, lessons units, and curricula within the public school units. And we're going to focus on some concrete examples of what this might look like in the classroom and have you think through a change or a revision together with other attendees. Okay. So I want to remind you before we get started of some previous training that DPI supplied or offered back in March and April. And this was regarding the implementation of the ELD standards. So if you were unable to attend, we would encourage you to view the slides, watch the video, and complete the implementation plan at a later date. and there is a link available on this slide for you to access those materials. And this will allow you to better plan out your district or school's timetable and activities that you want to complete. We also encourage you to join the Q&A session this afternoon, and that would give you an opportunity to reach out to other attendees and maybe plan on how to implement trainings and best utilize the crosswalk. As decision makers in your system, we want to help you better understand the crosswalk. And the slides today are examples of what you might see in the classroom. Marshall, I don't know if there are any other comments you want to add about this.
No, other than we have our obviously I have my technical assistance office hours, every Wednesday from 2 to 3, and then we also have other office hours, and then we'll have obviously our EL coordinator meeting sometime here in the early fall, as well as any other additional kinds of trainings and supports that we're going to have for the field.
All right, great. Thank you so much. Okay, so now we're going to take a minute and review a screenshot of the crosswalk document. So here you can see on the left, of course, we have the 2012 standards, and on the right, the 2020 standards. On the left, you'll see the standards and the matrices that contain the model performance indicators, or NPIs, and the can-do descriptors. And there's some links on the left side to the actual slides from the 2012 standards, so you can study them more carefully. You may want to utilize those links. Please remember to download the document so the links become active and you can rotate the images as needed. On the right side, you're going to see the 2020 ELD standard statements, the key language uses, and the language expectations for each grade level and standard. These go in order, of course, from social instructional language, which is first, followed by language arts, mathematics, science, and social studies. And so the purpose of this document is to create a smooth transition from the former ELD standards to the current ones. Okay, so that was section 1. Now we're looking at section 2 of the crosswalk document. In this part, you will find a comparison of the 2012 performance definitions and the 2020 proficiency level descriptors. And this document, or this part of the document, allows us to understand multilingual learners at different proficiency levels, and it also can guide teachers in supports and accommodations for their students. So that's just a real quick overview of the document. Now we're going to look at parts of the crosswalk or standards that have changed and other elements that remain the same. Our current focus includes the big ideas, which are equity, integration, collaboration, and a functional approach. And these encourage standards-based instruction, so that's really important, and it's centered on the student. It also supports their cultural and linguistic abilities, and it responds to the strengths and the needs of the students. So we always want to keep those in mind within educating multilingual learners. The next slide shows us what remains the same, which of course are the can-do philosophy and the 5 ELD standard statements. And as I mentioned earlier, you'll see all 5 ELD standards on both the left and the right side of the crosswalk document. Kristen, are you there?
I am here. I forgot to click on mute. I'm so sorry.
Okay.
Oh, it's been a morning up here. Okay, let's get started. So we're going to start with change 1 of the crosswalk document. So before we get started, I'm actually going to come out of full screen just for a moment because I want to show something, and sometimes it's easier to visualize without being able to see. But we're actually going to try to do this a little differently with you all versus the way that we did it with our content teachers and our ESL teachers. However, you're going to notice if you've gone to the bit.ly that there are some hidden slides. That is because these are the slides that we used with our actual content teachers and ESL teachers. We wanted to make sure that you still have access to those slides, so they're hidden in today's presentation. But this way, if you are planning to take this back to your school, use it for a PD or in your district, you have access to all slides that were used. So the way that we're going to do this is we're going to allow you to become the experts. We want you to investigate change 1. So what we're asking you to do, and we're going to give you about 5 minutes, is to review slides 14 through 15 and just jot a few notes in your interactive notebook regarding the changes that you notice. Or if you don't have the interactive notebook, if you need to be able to just write it on a piece of paper, that is completely fine too. And as you take notice of the changes, we're asking you to think about the following. How are teachers already implementing these changes? And what areas might teachers need additional support in as they implement these changes? So it is 9:22, and we're going to give you about 5 minutes just to review these slides. So at 9:27, I will come back on and we will kind of discuss what we investigated. All right, guys, it's been about 5 minutes. Uh, if you need more time to digest change one, if you'll just type in the chat box right quick, more time, and I will give you a couple more moments. If you don't need more time, then we'll go ahead and discuss. All right. I'm not seeing anyone asking for more time, so we're going to go ahead and kind of discuss change one. So as you notice with change one, it includes interpretive and expressive language. Or, well, not, I guess we can use the word language there. Domains, I think, is a better word, though, for us to use. Uh, and what they've done is they've taken listening and reading and included it as viewing, which is interpretive. That's the input. Then they've taken writing and speaking, and that is how we represent what we've learned, the knowledge we've learned, and that is the output, which is expressive. And then on the next slide, you are able to see different ideas for interpretive learning and expressive, the representing. So, and a lot of the times you can, if you notice, it kind of repeats itself. So we have to ask the questions when we're thinking about viewing interpretive. What constitutes a text for gaining knowledge? Because a text is no longer just a textbook. There's so many different texts that we can learn from. And then for expressive, what actually constitutes writing and creating? Because even when you think about the way the workforce is now, the career readiness skills, the way that we ask students to sometimes write is not the way we actually even learned to write when we were in school, especially because of social media. If they are an influencer, for instance, the way that they're going to write on social media is much different than if they are a newspaper editor. So we have to kind of think about all of this. And so the multimodal learning really has changed instruction as our whole entire vision of learning has changed as well. So the questions that we have are, what are strategies you have seen teachers implement for viewing and representing concepts? And what areas of focus for instructional growth might you consider for professional learning opportunities at your school and or PSU? Feel free to unmute. My screen is not sharing. Okay. I'm sorry, there's a lag. Is it sharing now?
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. So I actually just had gone over the other slides. I'm sorry, there's a lag, which is why I have cut my camera off. We noticed that the other day as well. And so you might hear Lisa say even, you're going to see this come up on your screen. We're trying to get that timing down just right. So I apologize for the technical issues that we've had this morning. All right. So on that note, though, feel free, unmute. Let us know, what strategies have you already seen teachers implementing for viewing and representing concepts? What areas of focus can you kind of envision maybe for instructional growth that you might consider for professional learning opportunities at your school or PSU, depending on where you're at in your district? Ooh, green screens. I've always wanted a green screen. I think they're so cool. So yes.
All you have to do is buy green felt and use the rolling garment hangers that you get from like Walmart for $8.98, and you have a portable rolling green screen.
Oh my goodness.
All my staff have them.
I'll have to get with we have a theater arts teacher, and with my class being STEM, I really want my students to kind of set up like they're in a presentation the way that, and we'll talk more about that later on in life. I don't want to go off on a tangent, but I'm going to have to completely and totally share that idea with her, because we're like, if we could get a green screen, you can use it for your news class, and I can use it for my presentations. So yes.
Yes, you can have one for less than $15.
That is amazing. And I wholeheartedly agree with the appropriate technology. And I think that districts really started brainstorming about technology resources when we entered the COVID era. And I know that a lot of the resources that were purchased, at least like in our district, were things that were right there, easy to use tools for teachers. But now teachers are even asking for more tools. Okay, this is surface level. How do I really get my students to be able to use it and not just learn from it? Like Edpuzzle, I'll use Edpuzzle. great resource for the classroom when students are trying to learn, because it allows that time for the video to pause, them really to be able to think about what they've listened to, and it doesn't give them that sense of urgency of, oh gosh, I've got to be listening for this. But now teachers are asking for things other than just Edpuzzle because they want to be able to use the technology, and because it really does help our students prepare for the real world. Would anyone else like to share? Yes, and that's that whole idea, I think, of getting them comfortable, that release, like being able to say, okay, you're going to learn this. You're going to choose how you even learn to view the technology, whether they're reading a blog or they're watching a video, and them actually then being expressive in the way that they actually show what they understand. Is us getting comfortable as teachers knowing that, hey, we can figure this out, and it's okay if we don't have all the answers, most definitely. Anyone else have any thoughts? Does anyone have any questions about change one? Yes, I love a good word wall, and when it's student created, it's even better. I wholeheartedly agree. That even just as simple as that word wall really shows they understand the vocabulary they're learning, that academic language, which is key for their success. All right. Well, if no one else has any other thoughts, if you do think of a question or a great thought pops into your head, feel free, add it to the chat box. Uh, one little piece of advice that we have for you, I'm not sure if Lisa had already mentioned this earlier when I was having audio issues, but if you, at the very end before you leave, if you copy the entire chat and paste it into your journal, you have it to go back and reflect on later on as you're preparing for the school year. So we encourage you to do that as well. Oh, here's another idea. Yes, emergent bilinguals being able to sketch as representing. And I wholeheartedly agree on that one. Even something like, believe it or not, doodle notes. We had a conversation, I think that was with the content teachers maybe, that we talked about sketch notes and doodle notes, and how it really kind of, it surprises people because they'll use them and they truly do lower the affective filter, and the kids start to kind of light up because they're able to kind of sketch out their ideas. There's fill in the blank activities for them. It's not so much stress of, oh gosh, I have to get all of this on paper and understand it, but there's images to represent and that sort of thing. That is a question I am not honestly able to answer since I do not work directly with the creation of Access. But Marshall, can you read that question? Is there anything that you know regarding that question about adapting these changes and shifts? Would there be changes on the Access formats?
So yeah, so the question for everyone, in case you can't, see it or whatever, it says if we are adapting these changes slash shifts, would there also be changes on the access formats? And so typically, whenever WIDA makes any adjustments, it usually takes upwards of 2 or 3 years before you actually see it, in the access. But yes, as they've updated their thing, and they do a consistent updating on an annual basis where they evaluate their questions and the way the test is set up and things like that, and then make small changes. So, but yeah, if we hear about any major revisions or anything like that, that will be something that we would put out through our listserv.
Thank you, Marshall. All right, so on that note, we're going to go ahead and move to change 2 with Lisa.
All right, great. So change 2, it focuses on the key language uses, and that is a shift from the key uses. So what we're going to have you do is take a few minutes to investigate change number 2. And you can look on slides 21 through 32 and think about a few things as you are reflecting. So you can jot down on your notes, how do the content language uses better align with content standards? And what additional applications would you like to see in the classroom beyond the examples provided? So Kristen, if you can go ahead and click on the next slide. I want to show that visual before we get started. So there has been a shift, as you see here, and recount has been changed to narrate and inform, and discuss is now embedded in all 4 of the key language uses. So you're going to see this slide, which illustrates change number 2. And then after that, you're going to see a series of different lesson ideas and student examples. So if you could focus on those, once again, think about how they align with the content standards better now, and then consider additional applications for the classroom. We'll give you about 5 to 7 minutes to look at these slides. We'll check back in 5 minutes to see if you need more time. And if you have any questions, of course, if you will just type those in the chat or unmute. All right. Thank you. We'll get started now. Okay, it's been close to 5 minutes, so we'll give you about 1 more minute. And if you need any additional time, if you'll just let us know in the chat, please. All right, it looks like we're good. Kristen, would you be able to maybe scroll through the slides with the different student examples until we get to the Let's Discuss slide 33? Okay, great. So we're going to take a few minutes to think about the key language uses and how those maybe are a little bit easier now within the content area. So if you want to respond in the chat to your reflection or thoughts on those ideas. All right, great. I see a couple of ideas coming through. Lynn says she'd love to see a matrix for language levels correlated to the key language uses for staff to use as they transition to the new ELD standards. Let's see, back on slide 23. Such as narrate, use 1 to 2 words to tell about self, may use gestures, pictures, etc. All right, that's a great idea. And we're going to actually touch on that with our proficiency level descriptors that we're going to discuss in change 4. So that might be something that you could find really helpful for teachers to use within the district. Great idea. Thank you for sharing. And are there any successful strategies that you've seen or would like to see in your school or your PSU? The examples that are included here are some that Kristen and I have worked with our students. And I'm sure that you'll encounter other examples, but if you have any ideas or have seen any ideas, if you could share those, that would be great. All right, Beth says to model and guide. That's good. Those are some strategies that are really important to help scaffold and engage multilingual learners. I agree.
So this is Luann. I think that we're going to have to be very cognizant of teaching the difference between explain and inform, just because I think there's different levels of maybe of higher order thinking in there. And I'm afraid that our people will go back to what they know, and that's like the pies, the persuade and all that. So I really want to make sure that they understand the difference between those two. I think they'll get argue very quickly. I think they'll get narrate very quickly. But I think where they're going to have some issue is those other two, and being able to differentiate them for gen ed, for students, and even administrators to understand that questioning and how that's different.
Yes, and that's a great point. I know that Kristen and I were talking about something along those lines earlier, and she said that one thing that as a STEM teacher or content teacher that she's noticed is narrate would apply perhaps more to nonfiction, or excuse me, fiction text, and inform would be nonfiction. So that might be sort of a way to help in teacher thinking. I also like the chart that's on page 30 or slide 32 by Weta that actually shows you the difference between inform and explain and clarifies that a little bit more. Another way I think that the Crosswalk document really would be more accessible to content area teachers too is because with the writing piece in ELA, for instance, you would have that those personal narratives or the narrative writing. You would also have the explanatory or the informative writing. And then, of course, you would have the argue or the opinion. So that's a way that, you could link it to what teachers already know, but you're right, there needs to be some difference between those two, inform and explain. That's a great point.
Lisa, I'd also like to add with inform and explain, that's like a valid point because we even had that conversation when we were talking about the STEM lesson example
Right.
that I had created about my students had to inform me about things, but then they actually have to explain. It's a completely different level of higher order thinking, as Luann said. So I think that's a really valid point. And the way that might be easy to break it down is inform is kind of like, all right, you have learned, you have done the background information, you are knowledgeable to a point. So you can and tell me about it. But when you explain, you're actually like demonstrating in a sense almost, if that makes sense. Like that's when they can teach you the information is how I can kind of like break them apart, if that makes sense. But that is a very valid point because I can also see them saying, oh, author's purpose. Yeah, we've got this all day long. So that's a good point.
I almost think of a QAR, the right there in the text stuff, that would be like the lower level. And then when you're having to think about Arthur and me or information in me, that would be the further up, the explain.
Yes, I agree.
All right, great. Thank you so much for sharing that. We've also got some other notes in the chat about allowing newcomers to use their native language until they're able to communicate their interpretation of the information. That's important to always have that support. And if you have other students in the classroom who speak that native language, that's a good resource as well. Project-based learning, which I love. I love creating project-based learning units because that allows them, yes, to cover all 4 key language uses. And you can also do the different, all 4 different standards with language arts, math, science, and social studies with project-based learning as well. So that's another excellent point. Are there any other ideas? Is there anything else you'd like to add, Kristen, before we move on?
No, I think those are some great ideas, and I will just encourage everyone if you have a aha idea that you really want to share, even if we're on something else, feel free to put it in the chat box for everybody.
Okay, so I guess we can move on to change 3. Ooh.
Before we move on to change 3, because that is our next step, most definitely, we are going to take a quick break. We know sitting for 2 hours, even at just 2 hours, is best research strategies tell us that, you shouldn't sit for that long when you're learning. You should get up and do some movement. So we're going to take a quick 5-minute break. Feel free just to get up, stretch, whatever you might need to do. It is 9:53, so we will pick back up at 9:58ish, depending on how far along in 9:53 we are. All right, so it's been 5 minutes. We're going to go ahead and get back started as we want to respect your time. If you're still making your way back to your computer, we completely understand, but we're going to go ahead and get started with change 3. All right, so change 3 shows a shift from the 2012 Model Performance Indicators, NPIs, as you see illustrated up here next to the word change 3. And that's been changed to now actually the color band of the language expectations in 2020, which is down here. So they look completely different. They are achieving the same goal, but they look completely different. All right? So let me explain to you how. So everything that you see in the NPIs is very much all here. It's just written differently. Okay? So we have the grade level cluster, 6-8 still. Up there, you would still see the grade level cluster. We have narrate, the key language use. You still had your key language uses up here. Now, the only difference there would be recount is no longer a key language use, as Lisa explained to us in change 2. And then you also have the mode of communication, which is interpretive. All right? And last but not least, you have language expectations. Now, the great thing about these is that these language expectations add more specificity and concreteness to the ELD standards. So the NPIs kind of broke it down based on level, and Lisa's going to, in change 4, talk more about the proficiency level in change 4. Okay, so you'll be able to kind of still see how that interacts there. But these are the expectations, the language expectations. And so they appear more similar to the actual content area standards, and which makes it a whole lot easier for our content area teachers to kind of connect with. At least that's I remember when I first saw these, talking with some of my ELA friends, I'm like, look at these, y'all. And they're like, oh my gosh, we understand these. We don't have to go crying to you, because with me having my background in ESL, whenever we did our big ELA meetings at school, they're like, all right, Mills, it's your turn. You tell us how to get this done with the NPIs. And they're like, oh, we can do this now. Expectations, that makes sense all day long. So they provide goals for learning content vocabulary and are based on academic content standards. These are great for our EC department as well at school when we have duly identified students. They can use these to kind of help to write the academic language goals for those students in their IEPs. One of my good friends who co-taught with me for a few years, when she saw these, she's like, this is amazing, because I can use these to write their goals, and then they're also getting their ML services and their EC services, and they have similar goals for everything. So that is what's so great about these, that they really give us these expectations. All right. So with that, let's just talk a little bit more about what it actually means, how it's different. Okay, so in Crosswalk section 1, if you remember, Lisa kind of gave you an overview of this before we ever started. So this slide shows what the 2020 NPIs look like. And again, as we had said earlier, they are linked, and you might have to download and rotate the pages to read. So this is what the 2012 NPIs look like. They were based on the can-do descriptors, and then we kind of wrote them for each level. Now, for the 2020, it is very much just the language expectations. So it still kind of gives you the ideas what they should be able to do. Okay, right here, what they're doing, share ideas, and then they actually break it down with these language expectations, okay? And that is the great thing. Whereas I know, because I know Luann had already said something about the level 1, level 2, and yes, I know in 2012 had that with the AIs. Here, we're going to be able to kind of talk about it with the proficiency level descriptors and connect it back to these language expectations. So these language expectations, the big takeaway from these are they are written like content standards. So they are what we expect our students to be able to do in these grade levels. Okay. So on that note, further down in the crosswalk on the left, from the 2012 sample, you will see that still everything's previously linked, okay? Because there are so many documents and it's a lot of information, we thought to condense it this way would be much easier. And again, you can compare that with the actual language expectations, what we have now for 2020, okay? Now, NPIs. This is a teacher-created example of an NPI from a few years ago. It was someone in Lisa's district who wrote this, and as you can see, it really breaks it down for vocabulary building for each level. Okay, what they're doing at that level. Here, they're at level 5, they're writing a paragraph with 5 related sentences. Level 1, they're writing as a group. Level 2, write using sentence frames. So it really breaks it down by each level, okay, and what students will be doing. When we go and look at the new 2020 language expectations, this is what it looks like, okay? Same exact information, still vocabulary building, same grade level, same ELD standard, language for language arts, everything there is the same. However, we have bolded and italicized the one goal that they were focused on for this assignment, which is add precision and details to define, describe, compare, and, sorry, my chat box is in the way, classify topics and or entity, okay? With that said, that is the expectation. That's what, when students are done with this lesson, academic language-wise, this is what we're expecting them to be able to do with the vocabulary from that lesson. And I hope this is making sense. I hope that it's not completely like, oh gosh, I'm not sure what's going on. I hope like what we're saying is making sense. We are going to look at an example. Again, you have the links to all of these examples that we have shown in the presentation. We're only going to look at slides 1 and 2 for the simple fact that slides 3 through 8 are going to focus more on the proficiency level descriptor, and Lisa will talk about that with you and change. So on slide 1 here, you can see that they were using a Freire model to actually demonstrate their understanding of the word extraordinary. Okay, they had to write their own student definition, then they had to create a GIF for it, and then they had to actually explain their GIF there. Okay, so that is that. And again, student created completely. So when you see like the little red lines under here, let me just preface that's because this is student work. We did not correct the errors because, you know, authenticity is key when we're showing student examples. So you can see where our students are actually at when you're looking at these examples as far as their levels go with grammar and spelling and everything else. All right, then on slide 2, in order for them to add the detail and precision, they were writing sentences. And you can see here are their sentences. They use their vocabulary. They were able to use the word camouflage to explain how that's extraordinary. So we can see that this student actually understands what the word extraordinary means. All right. So this is just a very simple example that it actually does meet the language expectation. So we do not have to ask our teachers to jump over the moon in order to use these ELD standards and these language expectations. We are just asking them to make sure that our students are learning the academic language, all right, that vocabulary. So I think this example really is great because it breaks it down, because it really truly shows, hey, this is what our teachers already do. The only difference is now they can actually have, hey, this is my student's goal. Here's the proof they've actually learned this academic language because this is the expectation. Does that make sense? Now, we're going to now talk about just a sample that we're actually going to go then and apply, if that makes sense, okay? This is just a chart. And this chart just breaks down the first ELD standard, social and instructional language. For the 2012 NPIs, our social and instructional language, the NPIs, the goals are actually here, okay, for the standard. So if you click on that hyperlink, I'm not going to click on it just because then it goes and it opens it all up, but you have access to this so you can click on it. So you can see all of the NPIs for grades K-3 there, all of the NPIs for grades 4-12 here. For standard 1, social and instructional language. Now, for the revised 2020 language expectations, remember, these are the goals, what we want students to be able to do. This is their goal. They are written here. So the language expectations are the same for grades K-3. Now, what a student work sample looks like at grade K might be different than what a student work sample looks at grade 3. And that is completely okay. but these are their language expectations, their goals. The same with grades 4 through 12. And again, what a fourth grade student work sample looks like is going to probably be extremely different than what a junior in high school's sample looks like for arguing, because they have learned so much more content about writing claims and reasoning and all of that for arguing, if that makes sense, okay? But this is their expectations, what they should be able to do. All right, though just an example, here's a chart you could add for ideas when you are using the 2020 language expectations for Standard 1. This chart, you could copy and paste it. It's a table, so you could copy and paste it right into a Word document, and then you have easy access for you or teachers to be able to fill this out. So it's actually a really, really great chart. I credit Lisa for all of this chart. She created it. Her brain was behind this genius idea. So thank you, Lisa, for that. But what we're going to ask you to do, and for some of you, this may take you way back to the classroom, but we're going to ask you to think about the shift from NPIs to language expectations, the difference in those, and revisit the comparison within your grade level for ELD Standard 1, social and instructional language from the previous slide, okay? This one. So if you, I know we have a principal on here, so I will use principal as an example. If you're a principal in an elementary school, you're going to choose, you don't have to look at all the grade level clusters. You can pick one at your elementary school. If you are maybe someone who works at the district level with all grades, pick one that you want to pick, that sort of thing. If you're at a middle school, then you would pick grades 6 through 8, obviously. High school the same way, it's 9 through 12, okay? But so revisit that comparison, and what we are asking you to do, and I'm going to give you about 5 minutes just to kind of think about it. What do you notice, and how will this impact instruction in your classroom or content area? And if you're not in the classroom, think about how could it impact instruction in classrooms at your school? Or maybe you want to look at a particular content area. And I will also mention, before we just take a moment to digress all of this, we did choose Standard 1, language for social and instructional purposes, because that is the language that all content areas use. And we say that because it's as simple as thinking about rules at the beginning of the year, okay? Every content area, every teacher has to teach these rules, what they do for classroom management skills, right? Therefore, everyone's using the language for social instructional purposes somehow, some way. The teachers use it throughout the school year without realizing it. I guarantee anytime they do a review of something, anytime something new happens, new protocol, anything like that, even just when students are working together, maybe even in just groups, while they might be in math doing a group activity, they might have to first review the social language skills, and I say that in how we interact with each other, especially after having a few years off from all that interaction. That's been a very big key point, is this language for social instructional purposes, the social emotional aspect of all of this. Our students are learning how to re-interact with each other, regardless of their first language. So I will give you just a moment, or about 5 minutes. It's 10:12. At 10:17, I will unmute. I just want you to think about how this impacts instruction if you are not in the classroom, maybe at your school or at your district level. All right, so it's been 5 minutes. We hope that was enough time for you to kind of look back at the previous slide to kind of determine what changes, how the changes would work and impact instruction in the classroom today. Maybe at your school or maybe particular classrooms within your district. I'm not quite sure how you're envisioning this working for you in your school and or PSU. With that said, would anyone like to either unmute and share their ideas or put them in the chat box? All right, we have a response in the chat box. I agree, Luann. This is definitely one of those instances where less is more. It becomes manageable. It becomes where the teachers are like, oh, that's my language goal for my objectives that I'm writing on the board. If any of you have ever attended SIOP training, we have our content objectives and then we have our language objectives. Yes, I agree. This really does make it easier to lesson plan, especially for our content area teachers. And it also really helps with any co-teaching instances. You have an ML teacher coming in and they are working with those content teachers and they have these specific language expectations. They're written in the lesson. These are the goals on the board. It really allows for them to say, okay, this is how I can support these students. This is how I can support all students. Because, and I'm going to go backwards for just a moment. I actually went forward. I did not mean to do that. But when you read these language expectations, I'll just pick one: clarify and elaborate ideas based on feedback. When we have this language objective and we're teaching it, this is helping all students, not just our MLs. So when we're working and we're really teaching this vocabulary and we're expecting our students to use that academic language, it's not like, all right, y'all all know this, your teachers are not going to say, okay, this is only for my MLs. No one else is to learn this vocabulary. You're really using these strategies with all students in the classroom. So this is an expectation we should have of all students. So it helps everyone in that sense. I see a few more comments in the box. Ooh, I like that thought that just popped up. I'll come back to that one in just a second. Yes, the language expectations are the goal at the end, but that is no different than the content standards. The way the standards are written, that is the end goal. When we go, and I'll use ELA as an example just because that is my content area focus when I talk content area. The goal for claims and reasoning, I did not expect that on day one. That was the goal by the end of the year. And we would teach it, and then we would come back to it, and we would do it again, and we would see growth each time in each quarter that we taught a unit with claims and reasoning. But it was not something I focused on and said, oh, well, you should know it now. It's been 2 weeks. These are the end goals for our students. So yes, that's very, very, very good, valid point. And I agree, this is definitely not as overwhelming for content teachers. It's something we can give them, and they're not like, this is a foreign language. It's very much, oh, this is written like content standards. I've got you now. And then this other point, I really do like. 2012 is more of a passive approach. 2020 encourages more student engagement, and teachers can use alternative assessments. Yes, with the 2020, there was a lot. And it's not that, because I love the NPIs. I love how they're broken down for each level. It really puts it there. But if your background and the students that you work with, your specialty is not working with MLs, it can be very overwhelming. And it's just like when we hand our MLs, our newcomers at that, a packet of information and say, learn it, they shut down. The same thing happens with our teachers, because them learning about all of this is them learning a new language in a sense for some of them. So I really think these 2020 language expectations is within their language already. Yes, it's new information, but it's written like their language, so they're able to really use it in all content areas. All right. So with that said, I'm not seeing anything else. Does anyone have any other thoughts? Anyone want to unmute? I feel like I'm pressuring y'all to unmute. You don't have to, but we love hearing your voices. Yes, the 2020 language expectations, I think, will make life easier for everyone. And Lisa and I had this conversation. We love the can-do descriptors. They're still there. They have not been revised with the new 2020 model. We have the proficiency level descriptors now, which I think are a lot similar to those. But I just think the 2021s, they're just going to make a bigger impact in the classroom, this revision, most definitely. And I think that in itself is just such a beautiful thing.
Kristen,
All right.
I would like to say I can actually see the students being more metacognitive with this. That's something that is less information in terms of bullets, and they could really track their progress in this from the beginning to the end. And I can see them, okay, I'm getting better at generating questions about different perspectives. So they could actually become more metacognitive, and then it's going to become more meaningful to them and authentic.
I wholeheartedly agree with that. That is a great point. I mean, you think about student portfolios, they can really say, yes, here's my proof that I'm able to do this. And it makes sense to them because this is how they see all of the content standards written in the classroom. It's much more focused and on point for them for what is expected of them. It takes kind of that gray area out. All right. Well, on that note, yes, students and teachers, I wholeheartedly agree. This is like a little moment in my life when I saw these the first time, in all honesty, just because I knew that MLs would become, what they will become a part of the classroom in the sense that we're able to teach the language as content teachers and understand what we're doing, if that makes sense. The Npis, a lot of times I saw with my dear friends that I love very dearly, and we would just sit here and talk about, how do I do this? How do I do this? They now are like, okay, where are my language expectations? Give me those things, because I'm going to write this as my language objective on the board in language arts because it goes with our content standard. Like, they're just able to make that connection, and it's just great for them. So, all right. On that note, we're going to go ahead and move on to change 4. Lisa, I'm going to mute and let you take it away.
All right, thank you for sharing all these amazing points about change 3. I also want to address one question that was in the chat, and that was about making a copy of this presentation. We're having some technical issues, and we're working on that. We didn't want to change too much until we finished all of our presentations this week, but hopefully that will be available for you to make a copy in the next few days. That's what we're working on anyway. Okay, so now let's go ahead and talk about change 4. And this is the shift from the performance definitions to the proficiency level descriptors. So you'll see the 2012 version in the image on the left. And this was previously a 2-page chart for K through 12. And I think there was one for maybe listening and reading and another for speaking and writing. But what has happened with the proficiency level descriptors is that they have expanded. So now they include individual grade level clusters. They have a lot more specific information. They also have examples of what you can expect students to produce or comprehend with their language at their different proficiency levels. So that's really exciting. And then they've also reconfigured the language table to give us a little bit more depth within the area of discourse. Okay, so if we can go on to the next slide, we're going to look at an example of Crosswalk Section 2. This begins on page 103 in the Crosswalk document. And you can see on the left, once again, is 2012, the right's 2020. Out of the entire crosswalk, we thought this section pieced together seamlessly. The transition from 2012 to 2020 is very smooth. So that's something exciting to note. You can see this example shows a second to third grade cluster, and you can see that it focuses on the interpretive communication mode here with listening, reading, and viewing in this particular section. Okay, next we're going to look at an example of the 2020 reconfigured language table. You can also find that in the WIDA ELD Standards framework on page 33. And we wanted you to see here how the dimension of discourse now includes 3 different criteria. It's no longer just linguistic complexity, but it houses the organization of language, the cohesion of language, and the density of language. And it shows you how to focus on that and also some of the sample language features in this graph. Okay, so moving right along. In order to accommodate that expansion of discourse into 3 criteria, we have included links instead of repeating the 2012 discourse linguistic complexity 3 times. So you'll see some links to the same information. Instead of making this document a lot longer, we decided to do that. So that's just a little FYI as you're going through the crosswalk. And the next image is going to show you how you can apply the sentence grammatical complexity in the current 2020 standards. So I had an opportunity to co-teach with a 4th grade teacher this past year, and I really wanted to start to dip my toes in the new standards. So we came up with several projects and units. And one thing we did was we really worked on sentence construction with our students within the different content areas. And this chart is great because you can see, as I mentioned earlier, at the end of level 1, a student should be able to write the sentence fragments. And you see an example of that in parentheses at the top of the first column. You can also see how that changes over time till level 5 and 6 students are creating compound and complex sentences. So this is a progression that students develop understanding and complexity with their speaking and their writing. Okay, so now we are going to look at this information in a different chart, and this is just one that I created so you could see this only includes the speaking, writing, and representing, and it highlights the different changes in that grammatical complexity. So we're going to look again at the student example and show you how we applied this in the classroom. Okay, so we've already seen slides 1 and 2. And my co-teacher and I, we took a unit from Wonders, and we focused on the vocabulary and had the students create all of these different GIFs for the vocab instruction. And then we worked on developing their sentence construction. And we could do this in small groups within the classroom. We could also build on knowledge that the students had and have them working together to create these sentences. So for level 1 student, you could start out with a chart that maybe shows some different adjectives and nouns, and they can combine different adjectives and nouns to create different phrases or simple sentences. Okay, let's look at the next one. Slide 2 is actually going to show you how you can add the verbs and create a sentence to help the students as they move through that progression. One thing I loved about the proficiency level descriptors is they gave us really clear targets for language learning and curriculum planning. And this works for all students because you have those different grade level clusters. And so it can help us choose these appropriate scaffolds for students depending on their proficiency levels. All right, so let's move on to a level 3 student. You can see how these charts are consistently color-coded for the different parts of speech. So here students can see, okay, well, a noun is purple and that appears twice in a compound sentence. Oh, and I need another verb, that's in blue. So they understand with that color coding a little bit more of the structure of sentences and find that to be helpful. All right, let's move on to the complex sentences, which are next. And we did lots of different activities with the sentences. For students using complex sentences, I would focus on those coordinating conjunctions, have students really understand those words and take ownership of them. We would even have them practice writing and spelling and have little quizzes to make sure that they could generate these complex sentences independently. And I think that was very helpful. We also wrote the different parts of complex sentences on index cards and would have students work in a group and arrange themselves so that the sentence made sense and followed the proper format for a complex sentence. So those are some different ideas that perhaps students or teachers could use in the classroom. Okay, and then we have level 6 next, which gives us still more specifics. You can see how the adverbs and the prepositional phrases have been added at the end to make those sentences expanded. And the last slide is just a little slide for your use. These are the instructions for how to use or create a GIF with a Chromebook. So those are the steps that the students followed if you want to recreate that lesson. All right, so let's take a minute to discuss about change 4 and maybe how to implement it.
Lisa, really quick before we move on, there was a question about if there was a access to the student example. So I just wanted to show Lisa, which slide is this? Since I'm in full slide mode, I can't see what slide we're actually on here.
Right here.
But there is the link to the student example there, and also during, I believe it was change 3 when we saw the student example as well.
Yes, and I had placed that in the chat earlier. Let me copy that again, and I'll drop it back in the chat so they can have that. Okay, there we go. Thank you. All right, so now let's talk about how the proficiency level descriptors could impact instruction for your grade level or for a grade level at your school or public school unit. We're going to take a minute and discuss how you would use the PLDs to scaffold instruction and to think about how this could be adapted to meet different proficiency levels of multilingual learners. So we'll give you about 5 minutes to go through the crosswalk and look at those proficiency level descriptors for a specific grade level of your choice. And then if you will come back and maybe type in the chat your ideas about scaffolding using the proficiency level descriptors. And yes, and once again, we are working on allowing access with a copy. We tried a forced copy and that didn't work. So we're going to have to take a little bit of time to figure out what the technology issues are. And then we will try to make the the document available, but I don't think we'll have time to do that today during the presentation.
And I will also say, once we are able to get the link to work, if we have to create a new link for it, we will put the new link on the very first introduction slide of the presentation, like highlighted in its own little shape box, so that you can see, like it will say link to make copy of presentation or forced copy link, that sort of thing. So just check back later today. If you don't see anything today, check back tomorrow. It's a technical issue that we're working on behind the scenes.
And thank you so much for asking. All right, so we will give you about 5 minutes to look over the document. I'm going to drop the proficiency level descriptor link in the chat, and that is, of course, found in the Crosswalk, which you may already have open. And we will resume in about 5 minutes. Okay. Let us know if you have any questions. Thank you. Okay, it's been about 5 minutes. It's 10:43. So if you have any ideas about how you would use or how educators in your district should use the proficiency level descriptors to scaffold instruction, if you would share that with us by unmuting or typing it in the chat. All right, good. So I see we have an example using the kindergarten lesson with the life cycle of a butterfly. And looking at the PLDs, you've got some different scaffolding illustrations for each of those different levels, 1 through 6. All right, great. Thank you. Yes, scaffolding is very important for multilingual learners' understanding of the content. And it's also something that's important for assessments when you're working with the students. And there's another point that's great for adult multilingual learners as well. Yes, if you have parent meetings or conferences, sometimes sharing complex information, you might need to scaffold that for them just to help with that understanding too. That's a great point. Yes, and also if you have an English education program for students and parents, that would be helpful. And another great point, one thing I really like about the proficiency level descriptors is, yes, if you do have a newcomer level 1 student in high school, how would that instruction and that scaffolding look different than perhaps a kindergarten student that we were talking about earlier? So I think that's one of the beautiful elements about this guide that makes it so usable and really valuable, a valuable tool. All right, so if you think of anything else and want to add that to the chat, that would be great. Once again, we recommend you make a copy of the chat and save it so that you can reflect on some of these ideas and apply them in the future. Since we only have about 15 minutes left, we have a couple of other items we'd like to cover. So if you want to move on to the next slide, Kristen. Okay, we're going to talk about when the crosswalk could make an impact. So we just want you to brainstorm some ideas, and you can post these in the chat as well or share out and tell us how do you think the crosswalk could make a difference within your school or educational environment? So think about the first column. How would the ESL specialist, the ML lead teacher, and the ESL teacher benefit from using the crosswalks? You could also think about how this document could be used for content area teachers or those with multifaceted roles like yourself. How do you think this document could be impactful? All right, great. I see some great ideas coming in the chat. With letters training, yes, there is a lot of anxiety with that. Teachers have a lot on their plate, but these do simplify the English language development standards and will connect teachers to their other training. So I think that's a great point. Could definitely be beneficial when trying to plan instruction and knowing what it's supposed to look like. Yes, it does simplify everything. And it puts us all on the same page, and it gives us a guide so that we do speak the same language. And it can connect to other types of training, most definitely. So much of what we do within the ESL world includes best practices and how to really help support our students. So that differentiation and these new standards definitely support students across the board. Also helps with co-teaching and making informed decisions and goals. Yes, goal setting, that's huge. I could see the standards being used by teachers and students alike with goal setting. Excellent. Okay, so we had sort of created a list of some of our ideas. You might want to look at this list and add some of yours to the list about different ways to use the crosswalk. So here you can see some thoughts that Kristen and I came up with, and of course yours would be a great addition here. Okay, excellent. Thank you all for sharing those wonderful ideas in the chat. We really appreciate it. And you can see here, I know I do a lot as an ESL teacher, but my role is a little bit multifaceted too because of the work that is required with parents and then I guess professional development with teachers within our district. So I think that some of the things I'm really excited about doing this summer is just becoming more familiar with these different standards and standards documents and deciding how to use them to help support our ELs within the school. And if you have any additional ideas that you'd like to share or collaborate, please remember to join us for the Q&A this afternoon. All right, we have about 10 minutes left. So Kristen, if you want to talk about the artifact and some of those reflection questions.
Yes, and before we do that, I just saw the comment that you cannot see the answers that are included on the slide. We are going to copy and paste those answers onto that slide for you. We just wanted to see your ideas before you actually saw the answers, just like we would do with students in the classroom. We want to see what they're thinking before we actually give them our suggestions. All right, so we're going to take a moment and we're going to talk about the artifact. Again, the artifact is for you and yourself only. You can post this on Go Open NC if you would like. You also may be asked by your district to turn it in, but this is really just for you to self-check and make sure like you did gain the information from the session, you understand it, and you're good to go. No different than what we would ask students to do in the classroom. So there are 3 questions in the journal for you to answer about our session today. When would you find the crosswalk most helpful in your current role? And we kind of just talked about that too, so that should be quick, breezy. How can we implement the crosswalk with fidelity? And then what will be your top 2 changes in practice? And maybe for you, if not in your practice, but maybe top 2 changes that you could see in instructional practices within your school or PSU, that sort of thing. So you may have to think about this in a little more broad spectrum in the sense of the fact that you might be at the district level, or you might be even the principal at your school, or assistant principal, or instructional coach, that sort of thing, just depending on your role. And again, like we said, this is for you and yourself. Feel free to share though on Go Open NC, because it just is it's a great resource and it gives everybody ideas. It's a really great network of ideas. And if you've never been on, I encourage you to go on there as well because there's so much information, so many suggestions, success stories there. And on that note, we are done with the artifact. Are there questions about the artifact in the journal? In the past session, we have had questions about where to find that. It's in that interactive journal. You should be able to click right into the box, the little table where the questions are, and type your answers. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions in the chat box, so Lisa, I'm going to let you take it back over and explain these extend your learning slides. I will go to the one for today's session.
All right, great. So we do have 3 extending your learning slides depending on the different roles in education that you or your colleagues might have. So we wanted to give you different ways that you could continue to engage with the Crosswalk document and the ELD standards over the summer. So these were just a few that we brainstormed. One thing to do would be to adapt an ESL walkthrough instrument for coaching at your school or your district or your, I guess, your educational role. And maybe think of some of the elements that are most important. You can consider the 4 different changes that we've discussed today. Another way that you could work on a walkthrough, there's actually some online PD through WIDA that is available to all educators throughout the state of North Carolina. And that talks about ESL walkthroughs. There are also just different types of PD for content area teachers who have students who are multilingual learners, ways to help English as a second language teachers, anyone who has any impact on MLs can find resources and different opportunities to learn new skills and develop their craft within some of the professional development provided by NC DPI. And then another idea is also to use goal setting for teachers, for students, for your district or your PSU using these different proficiency level descriptors. All right, so with that said, if you look on the next slide, there's a link to the professional development offerings through DPI, and those do include the items that are bulleted there that are great resources for all educators. And I guess the next slide, slide 59, will show you where you can find additional resources. One is the ELD Standards Hub. And then there are 2 WIDA FAQ series. These are really short documents, but when we were working on the Crosswalk, we found them to be super helpful because they're very informative and they're very direct and easy to understand. So those are some additional resources for you. We thank you so much for your time. And I want to remind you once again about the office hours this afternoon. If you want to ask questions or brainstorm, we're here to talk with you and chat, and we'd love to get to know you a little bit better. And then finally, on the last slide, you'll see there is a PD evaluation link. I'm going to try to drop that in the chat as well. So if you will, please give us your feedback on the presentation. We'll find that to be really helpful. And we just can't thank you enough for really encouraging our multilingual learners, our educators throughout the state, and for being here with us today to learn and discuss the new Crosswalk document.
Yes, thank you everybody for joining us today. We have enjoyed being with you for these last couple of hours. We hope you found everything beneficial. And if for some reason, later on down the road you have a question or you're thinking about this and just need our opinion, feel free to email us at any point. You have our email addresses on one of those first couple of slides. So don't hesitate to ever reach out if we're needed.
And I also want to mention that the office hours, the Q&A chat this afternoon, the link is here. You can also find it in your summer conference bulletin where you registered. It's the same link every day. So if you need it, you should be able to find it. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
Absolutely. Thank you. I'm going to end the recording.